It's been another raucous week on the campaign trail, from questionable candidates to the Donald Trump factor. Joining us now are Tonda MacCharles, Ottawa bureau chief for the Toronto Star, and our very own David Akin, who has been on the road with the Conservatives and right after the show is going to run and jump on the Liberal bus to join them.
Yep, I love campaigns.
Well.
Good morning.
Yes.
Another week of talking about Donald Trump. Tonda, we wanted to kind of lay out what the differences are and how the leaders would deal with him, because we talk a lot about Trump and the effect.
Yeah.
But what do we know about what Pierre Poilievre versus Mark Carney have said their approaches would look like?
I think what you've seen toward the end of the second week of this campaign is a shrinking of those differences. There were, there was a sharper contrast in how they spoke about the U.S. at the start. But look, once the tariffs on autos came in midweek from the U.S., Pierre Poilievre had started his campaign talking about the possible deeper integration of trade ties, and that he would seek to have Mr. Trump renegotiate the deal with an eye to deepening integration both on the trade and security front. Whereas Mr. Carney, the Liberals, they've been saying for a couple of weeks now, that old relationship is over. There is no prospect of deepening ties. We're going to look elsewhere for allies, to Europe and beyond. And they set aside that idea that we could be more involved. Now, here we are starting at the third week of the campaign, and both the main parties, actually all the parties in Canada, support counter tariffs, immediate retaliation, the tariffs that have been imposed by the Liberals. We've seen the Conservatives propose a $3 billion fund to help companies and businesses directly impacted. The Liberals have put a big emphasis also on helping businesses, but also on workers, made a whole bunch of changes to EI. But in the long run, look, both the main parties are talking about the need for an immediate renegotiation of the trade and security relationship. So actually the differences have shrunk, even to the extent that, one of the big irritants in Donald Trump's mind was this digital services tax on Amazon and Facebook and those big CEO companies that were his buddies at his inauguration. Liberals and Conservatives agree that Canada should tax them, and should tax them in a way that drives Trump crazy and is certain to be responded to in the next round of tariffs, I expect.
And the language at the end of the week that Poilievre, and you're right, I was out with him, I was listening to a change in tone, and he's talking now about the negotiation, but no culture on the table, no water on the table. We're not changing official languages. And it was much more it's much more standing in, confrontational. And I think that's, take a look at the polling data, is a lot of people are making their ballot choice based on who they think can best deal with Trump. And I think Poilievre is saying, I've got a plan to deal with Trump. And then he goes, I also have plans to deal with crime and banning cabinet ministers from the World Economic Forum, etc. But there was definitely a change in tone at the end.
Change that he denies, actually. He says, I'm not pivoting. I'm not shifting. This was always my plan. But in fact, very clearly from Sunday to Friday last week, he made the pivot in rhetoric and in tone.
Take a look at the podium in front of him on Thursday.
Exactly.
None of those slogans are on the podium. It's now a stylized, looks like an Air Force logo, a stylized red maple leaf. Just little things like that. That's why
It's a big maple leaf.
It's a big maple leaf.
Big maple leaf.
Yeah.
David, I want to talk to you about the rallies that you've been at, because this has been a real point of pride for the Conservatives. When you say you're sliding in the polls, they say, well, look at the rallies. And it is historic. I mean, they're huge, huge numbers. There's hundreds of people being turned away. You were at them. What's your sense of what that means for the Conservatives, having those astronomical rallies right now?
So this is my 7th federal election where I've been on a leaders tour, and I've never seen sizes like this consistently. Justin Trudeau, I think in 2015, filled a hockey arena in Brampton or something like that. At the end. But this has been like this for Poilievre for like a year when he travels around the country. 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 people in Kingston, in Oshawa, in Surrey, BC. Why are these big rallies important? What do they signify? First of all, we know that pollsters, when they find a Conservative, that person is almost certain to vote. We know right? And this is physical validation of that polling data. But number two is this. The Conservative campaign has come under criticism for its focus, for not focusing enough on Donald Trump. And the campaign, and Poilievre himself has said, I'm not pivoting. Well, I can tell you that inside the campaign, these monster-sized rallies, their validation, they think, of that strategy. And that's one of the reasons that they're not shifting, because look at these rallies. They say it's proof what we're saying is important. You can argue whether or not their focus of the campaign is correct or not. They are behind in the polls, but it's a solid base, and that solid base is showing up to hear Poilievre's greatest slogan hits.
Here's the thing about massive rallies, though. They are a huge drawdown on a campaign's resources in any region on any given night. All the campaigns and whatever support you can bring to those rallies is time they're not spent outdoor knocking. And we've heard some Conservative operatives in Ontario criticize that and say, look, losing campaigns can bring out big rallies. What really matters is the effort to get the vote out. How motivated are those people in those rallies to actually vote in the end? That's going to be a big question. Older voters tend to be the more motivated ones that show up at a poll on voting day. Will the young men who are very animated for Mr. Poilievre be those voters? It's not clear, but he's a rock star to them.
He's a rock star, and just a message to viewers. I'm looking at the camera. If you planning on going to one of these things, 3 hours before doors open is about when you want. That's what we're seeing. We're there 3 hours beforehand, and there's already several hundred people lined up to get into these venues. So.
And the question will be if that's the energized base, and of course the need to appeal to women, a big thing for the Poilievre campaign. The Liberals have their challenges too with who they need to appeal to. There was a lot of talk about Western Canada this week, where I'm from originally, in Alberta. Preston Manning came out and said if Mark Carney wins, this is going to drive separation. Even Pierre Poilievre seemed to disagree with that. And we're seeing the Liberals focus in on Alberta this week, also the Conservatives. There's been a lot of campaigning in the lower mainland of BC, a lot of campaigning in and around the GTA. Now we're seeing Alberta become the focus. Tonda, what do you make of that?
Well, it's interesting. So both Carney and Poilievre will be in BC this weekend and Monday. Both of them will be in Alberta. It's interesting to me that Poilievre will be in Alberta this week. Why?
He's going to lose. It's
because there's a threat there from the Liberals. The Liberals' rise is concerning them. But look, is Western alienation, separation, a real thing, and to what extent it'll play in the campaign? I find that an interesting question. There are polls that show consistently about 20% of voters in Alberta and Saskatchewan do embrace a sentiment of separatism if the Liberals were to win and if energy exports were to be tariffed. The Liberals have not gone so far as to say they will do that. They have said everything's on the table. But what does that actually mean? That is an issue, I think. In Alberta, Premier Smith is right. People are very concerned about putting a tax on, the best and biggest resource and revenue generator for that province. But it will require, I think, some fancy tap dancing on the part of both Poilievre and Carney to see how they deal with that issue when they're in Alberta this week.
Being faced with that, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think Daniel Smith's head's going to explode when on April 28th she wakes up to find so much red in Alberta. Calgary Skyview, Calgary McKnight, Calgary Confederation, Calgary Centre. That's 4 just in Calgary that are trending right now towards the Liberals. They hold one of those. In Edmonton, where they have 1 seat, Edmonton Centre, Edmonton Southeast, where Amarjeet Sohi is running, Edmonton Riverbend can go. In my model, Edmonton West, that's Kelly McCauley. It's been redrawn. It's got new boundaries. That could go. It may not. Kelly might just hold on, might win by a bit. But the point is, there's going to be more than 2 Liberals elected in Alberta, and that might, that means that Alberta, you got to fight for it. And that's why Poilievre is showing up to shore up the base, and that's why Sue Carney sees some pickups.
I think Poilievre's got a delicate interplay with Daniel Smith to watch out for, though, insofar as
despite her help, it hasn't been so helpful to him so far.
Yeah, how does that play with voters elsewhere in the country? Look, but to me, that national unity has been put on the table by Western provincial leaders is super interesting, because in Quebec, guess what? The vote driver right now is not what you would expect Quebec culture or the threat to Quebec identity, insofar as it's Trump, tariffs, and U.S. aggression perceived by Quebec voters.
Nationalists across the river, in Quebec, nationalists, Bloc East, are looking past Carney's inability to talk to them in their own language, and they're ready to vote for Carney, precisely because of that.
It's astonishing to me. They're more generous towards his French mistakes than I am.
Yes, exactly.
We have 1 minute left, so with the 30 seconds to each of you, what you're looking for on the campaign trail this week, Tonda?
Well, for me, the whole start of the week is around this question of how do both the Liberal and Conservative leaders deal with the West's demands, particularly on energy.
Yeah, I'd say the same thing. I'm really looking forward to I'm going to be on the Carney campaign for the next week or so. I'm looking forward to smelling that campaign up close. From afar, it seems like it's moving at a measured pace. And I know Carney's had to come back to Ottawa to be Prime Minister a couple of times. Poilievre's keeping up a pretty, it's their tour does not come back to Ottawa every week.
No, it's got a pace.
It's got a pace to it. But yeah, for sure, where the West fits into both of the major parties. And on the NDP side and the Bloc side, watching both those support continue to melt.
Well, we will continue to keep an eye on it. Thank you both for joining us on our political panel. We look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thanks. Have fun out there.
Thank you.